In this mini tutorial we're going to think about the spinothalamic system, which is a phylogenetically ancient part of the somatosensory system and is primarily involved in aspects of crude touch, pain and temperature sensation. And these modalities carried by the spinothalamic system make sense because that they are in a very old system, if you like, because they're crucial for the survival of the organism. This dorsal column system tends to give us much finer aspects of touch which are not necessarily essential for survival. So let's draw out the spinothalamic system in the same way that we do the dorsal column system. And the first thing we're going to do, of course, is draw our generic outline of the whole central nervous system with the cerebral hemispheres and the brainstem here with the spinal cord. Okay, and what we're going to do is, of course, put on our midline, because the midline is important when we're considering neuroanatomy of pathways, especially when those pathways are known to decussate, which the sensory system, of course, is known to do. So there is our outline of the central nervous system. And we're going to start off in red, drawing on a sensory neuron, which is entering the spinal cord at a lumbar level. So here is a primary first order sensory neuron, which has its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, following the usual rules of the sensory system, and it enters the spinal cord here. Okay. Now we're considering the spinothalamic system, and in the spinothalamic system, the first order neuron synapses on the second order neuron at approximately the same level at which it enters. Okay, so here our first order neuron has entered the cord and it's synapsed immediately on a second order neuron, and we know that the second order neuron decussates. So here is our second order neuron crossing the midline and ascending through the cord up into the brainstem and then into the thalamus. So we just draw the thalamus on here. Okay. So there's our second order neuron. It synapses on a third order neuron. Oops, we'll make sure that we retain the same colour. It synapses upon a third order neuron. And this third order neuron, being one receiving information about the lower half of the body, projects to the medial part of the primary sensory cortex. So there is the pathway for sensory information in the spinothalamic system from the lower half of the body. The spinothalamic tracts specifically refers to this pathway here. So this is the spinothalamic tract, i.e. the tract connecting the spinal cord to the thalamus, hence the spinothalamic tract. Now, we can do the same thing that we have done already for the dorsal column system, but for the spinothalamic system. So what we can do is, in orange say, we can do a cross-section through the spinal cord at this level here. Okay, and if we look at the spinal cord at that level there, we see the usual structures that we're familiar with. Okay, there's the central canal. There's our grey matter there. We'll just add on where our dorsal and ventral roots enter. And we'll add those. So there's our dorsal root ganglion and our ventral root. Okay. In comes our red sensory neuron with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. And what that neuron does, as we said, is it enters the spinal cord and it enters the dorsal horn. Okay, it enters the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and it synapses then on the second order neuron, which then crosses over to this point here where the spinothalamic tract resides, and then it ascends. Okay, and goes all the way up to the thalamus. So that's a lumbar level of the spinal cord. So now what we're going to do is we are going to draw on what the pathway looks like for a sensory neuron supplying a cervical level of the spinal cord. So this would be a sensory neuron supplying a cervical dermatome. Okay, so here is wherever its receptor is in the skin. Here is its cell body. Here is our cervical first order neuron entering the cord and synapsing. And here is our second order neuron carrying that information from the cervical dermatome, crossing the midline and ascending to the thalamus, where it synapses on our third order neuron. And here's our third order neuron going to the lateral aspect of the hemisphere, where we know that the face and the upper limb are represented. So that's the pathway for the upper half of the body, effectively. If we draw a cross-section through the spinal cord at this level here, okay, we see something slightly different. So let's draw once again the outline of the cord. So there's the outline of our cervical cord, central canal, and our grey matter. We can draw on here, once again, an entry zone for a dorsal and a ventral root. So here's our dorsal root with its ganglion. Here's our ventral root, like that. Here is our green sensory neuron with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, projecting through the dorsal root and into the grey matter, the dorsal horn of the cervical cord, where it synapses, onto the second order neuron. Then the second order neuron crosses the midline and ascends like this. Now, we have demonstrated something extremely important about the spinothalamic system here. In red, we've got the spinothalamic axon carrying information from the lower half of the body, and in green, we've got the spinothalamic axon carrying information from the upper half of the body. So you can see, as you progress up the cord to successively higher levels of the cord, axons are added on medially to the medial aspect of the spinothalamic tract. So if we draw the outline of the spinothalamic tract, which is roughly in this kind of region here, okay, it might help to zoom in a little bit at this point. If we draw the outline of the spinothalamic tract, we can define specific zones, like this and like this, and we would find that the lower half of the body, the lumbar dermatomes, are found most laterally. The upper half of the body, i.e. the cervical dermatomes, are found most medially, and the thoracic dermatomes are represented in an intermediate fashion. So this is actually the complete opposite of the case in the dorsal columns, which you might recall are arranged a bit like this, where the lumbar dermatomes are arranged most medially, then it goes thoracic, then it goes cervical, like this. So the arrangement in the spinothalamic tract is the opposite of what we find in the dorsal column. And of course, this could have certain implications for an expanding central lesion of the cord. So you can imagine that if we had a lesion growing in the cord, let's just add on a lesion here in purple. If we had a lesion originating from the central canal growing in the cord, it might do a number of things. In fact, early on, what this lesion might do, and this is typical of a condition called syringomyelia, is it might destroy these decussating fibres here initially. And what you've got to remember is whenever we're drawing neuroanatomical pathways, we typically only draw one side, but you've always got to apply an imaginary mirror and remember that yes, we've got a second order neuron here decussating at this point, but there's also a corresponding second order neuron here which also decussates. So a centrally expanding lesion like the one that we've just drawn in purple would initially destroy these decussating fibres originating from neurons on both sides. So we would get bilateral signs from this lesion. Then as the lesion continues to grow, we'd then start to affect the dorsal column modalities for the lower half of the body, then the spinothalamic modalities for the upper half of the body. So the pattern would be different. We get what's called a dissociation. So that's all that I want to talk to you about with regard to the dorsal column pathway, the spinothalamic pathway. And you should watch this in conjunction with the video I made on the dorsal columns. Okay, thank you.